Hello, everyone, and welcome to Midnight Whispers. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. I used to work at a museum that had once been a fully functioning prison. Long before it became a place for tours and history lessons, it had been a place of punishment, confinement, anger, and suffering. By the time I started working there, the cells were empty and the bars were cold to the touch, but the atmosphere never felt empty. From the very beginning, there was a sense that the past had not fully let go of that place. I worked there for over 8 years, and during that time I experienced more things than I can easily explain. At first I tried to be rational about it. I told myself that old buildings make strange noises, that the mind can play tricks on you when you're tired, especially when you're working late shifts in dim lighting. But the longer I stayed there, the harder it became to ignore what was happening. These weren't just sounds or feelings. These were physical encounters. I was pushed more times than I can count. Sometimes it felt like a firm shove to the shoulder. Other times like hands pressing against my back, forcing me forward when no one was there. I was slapped across the arm once while standing completely alone in a hallway. I had something bite me hard enough to leave a mark, a sharp pain that made me yell out in shock. I was dragged by my clothing, pulled backward as if someone had grabbed onto me and didn't want to let go. I was even punched once, at a sudden blow that knocked the breath out of me and sent me stumbling. There was never anyone there when these things happened. Nighttime was always the worst. Locking up the buildings after hours was part of the job, and it was the part everyone dreaded the most. Each building had its own energy, its own personality, but some were far more active than others. As I walked through dark hallways, flashlight in hand, keys jingling too loudly in the silence, I never knew what I might see when I turned a corner. That uncertainty created a constant tension that sat heavy in my chest. Some nights, it was just the feeling of being watched. Other nights, it was footsteps behind me that stopped the moment I turned around. And then there were the nights when things made themselves known in ways that couldn't be brushed off. One night, I went into the cell house to turn off the lights. The cell house was one of the oldest parts of the prison, a long stretch of metal bars, concrete floors, and narrow walkways. Even during the day, it felt oppressive. At night, it felt alive. Every sound echoed. Every movement felt amplified. I rounded a doorway, already uneasy, and came face to face with a full-bodied apparition. He was standing there in an inmate's uniform, solid and unmistakable. He wasn't transparent or misty. He looked real, like a living person who had simply stepped out of a cell. For a split second, my brain tried to make sense of what I was seeing. I thought maybe someone had wandered into a restricted area, maybe a co-worker playing a cruel joke. Then he vanished. There was no fade, no warning. He was just gone. The space he had occupied suddenly empty. I stood there frozen, my heart pounding so loudly it felt like it echoed off the walls. The lights buzzed overhead, and the cell house felt colder than it had moments before. I finished my task as quickly as I could and got out of there without looking back. That wasn't even the only entity I encountered regularly. There was one inmate in particular who had been notorious when the prison was still active. He had been involved in one of the major riots, a violent event that left lasting scars on the facility and on the people who survived it. Stories about him were still told by staff, passed down like warnings. According to the records, he had been aggressive, unpredictable, and deeply angry. His spirit, for lack of a better word, seemed to have attached itself to me. I would feel him following me as I walked the grounds. The sensation was unmistakable, like a presence just a step behind, always just out of sight. Sometimes I would hear footsteps matching mine, stopping when I stopped. Other times, I would feel a pressure in the air, heavy and hostile, as if someone was standing too close. It didn't matter where I went. He was there. One night, I was with a paranormal investigation group that had been granted special access. They were professionals, respectful of the space, and fully aware of the history of the prison. We went into an area that we never allow the public to visit because it's in serious disrepair. The floors are unstable, the walls cracked, and parts of the structure are barely holding together. Even during the day, it's dangerous. At night, it feels downright wrong. As soon as we entered, the atmosphere changed. The air felt thick, almost hard to breathe. The group set up their equipment, whispering to one another, trying not to disturb whatever might be there. I stayed close, already uneasy. That's when it happened. We were screamed at to leave. It wasn't a distant sound or a faint voice. It was loud, furious, and clear. The sound echoed through the space, bouncing off the walls. At the same time, something snarled directly at me, a deep, animalistic sound filled with pure aggression. I felt it in my bones. Every instinct in my body told me that whatever was there did not want us there, especially me. We didn't argue. We left immediately. Encounters like that were not uncommon. Shadow figures were a regular occurrence, not just for me, but for my co-workers as well. We would see them moving along walls, darting through doorways, standing at the end of corridors. Sometimes they would just watch. Other times, they would follow, always staying just close enough to be noticed, but never fully revealing themselves. Visitors experienced it too. There were days when people would come running out of certain buildings, faces pale, breathless, saying they felt chased. Maximum security was especially bad. More than once, visitors refused to continue tours after stepping inside. Some claimed they were followed. Others said something whispered to them, or that they felt hands brushing against them. A few left the grounds entirely, eyes shaken and silent. By the time my 8 years there came to an end, I had dozens of stories, enough to fill hours of conversation, enough to convince even the biggest skeptics that something remains in places like that. Prisons hold pain, fear, rage, and despair, and not all of it fades when the doors close for good. That museum may look quiet now, preserved and educational, but beneath the surface, it still remembers what it was. And sometimes, it reminds the people who walk its halls that the past is never as gone as we like to believe. If you want, you can send the next story whenever you're ready. When I was 4 years old, I was too young to understand fear in the way adults do. The world at that age feels simple and safe, especially when you're with a parent. You trust completely. You sleep easily. You assume that nothing bad can happen as long as someone bigger and stronger is nearby. That night, I was asleep in the car, unaware that something happened that would stay with my family for years. Something that still feels unfinished even now. My dad was driving. It was late enough that the road was quiet, but not so late that the world felt empty. In the Philippines, roads are rarely truly silent. There's always some movement, some sign of life. I was in the car with him, curled up and sound asleep. The steady motion of the drive doing what it always did and knocking me out completely. I don't remember the drive itself. I don't remember the sounds, the turns, or the passing lights. All of that comes from what my parents later told me. The road we were on ran through Imus, Cavite. At the time, it was just another stretch of road to me, to my parents, and especially to people who knew the history of the area. It was something else entirely. Cavite is a place layered with history, and not the clean kind you read about in textbooks. Long before modern roads and houses, before cars and streetlights, this land saw violence. During the time of Spanish colonization, many people were killed, punished, executed, or discarded without ceremony. Bodies were dumped. Lives were erased. Some places absorbed that history so deeply that people still talk about them in hushed voices generations later. That road was one of those places. According to my dad, everything was normal at first. He was focused on driving, hands on the wheel, eyes on the road. I was asleep, breathing evenly, completely unaware of anything beyond my dreams. Then, without warning, he felt something touch him. Not a brush, not a breeze, a hand. He felt a small hand reach around his neck from behind, gripping him the way a child might, fingers curling in close, almost like it was trying to choke him. The shock of it hit him instantly. His first thought was me. That was his instinct. A child's hand around his neck in a moving car at night. He turned his head, heart pounding, expecting to see me awake, maybe having climbed forward somehow, maybe scared or confused. But I was still asleep, completely asleep. My body hadn't moved. I wasn't leaning forward. I wasn't reaching out. I was exactly where I should have been, undisturbed, unaware. That's when fear truly set in. The logical explanation disappeared in an instant. There was no child awake in the car. No one else was there. And yet he had felt it clearly. He tried to grab the hand. Even while driving, even with the car in motion, he reached up instinctively, trying to pull it away from his neck. He said it felt real enough that his body reacted without hesitation. But the moment he tried to touch it, it was gone. Not pulled away, not released. Gone. Like it had never been there at all. Despite the fear, my dad kept control of the car. That part of the story always stands out to me. He didn't swerve. He didn't slam the brakes. He didn't panic in a way that would put us both in danger. He stayed focused enough to keep driving, even though something completely impossible had just happened to him. Later, my mom would say that if he hadn't been such a steady driver, that moment could have ended very differently. He finished the drive. He got us home safely. He didn't wake me. He didn't tell me what had happened right away. Maybe he didn't want to scare me. Maybe he needed time to process it himself. Or maybe he didn't yet have the words for something that made no sense. I didn't find out about it until years later. 7 years later, to be exact. By then, I was older, more aware of the world, more capable of understanding fear and history. My mom told me the story one day while we were driving on that same road. It wasn't a dramatic reveal. It was almost casual, the way people sometimes talk about things they've carried quietly for years. She mentioned it the way you might mention an old memory that never quite faded. She told me what my dad felt. She told me how he turned to check on me and found me asleep. She told me how he tried to grab the hand and couldn't. Then she told me something else. That road, she said, used to be a dumping ground. During the time when people were being killed under Spanish rule, bodies were left there. Not buried properly, not honored, just discarded, children included. People who were punished, executed, or murdered without record. Over time, the road was built. Life moved on. Cars replaced carriages. Houses went up. People forgot or tried to forget. But not everything goes away just because time passes. That was the part that made my skin crawl. From that point on, every time we drove down that road, my mom would mention it, sometimes quietly, sometimes with a warning tone, as if reminding the road itself that we remembered. It became a ritual almost, a shared understanding that something had happened there, something that didn't belong to the present. I moved to Japan when I was 9 years old. My life changed completely. New country, new language, new surroundings. The Philippines became something I remembered, rather than something I lived in every day. You would think that distance, time, and growing up would dull the feeling tied to that story. It didn't. Even now, when I think about that road, I feel a strange heaviness. It's hard to describe. It's not panic exactly. It's more like awareness, like something unfinished. Like the story didn't end that night in the car, and it didn't end when we moved away. I don't remember the hand myself. I was asleep. I have no memory of it happening. And yet, it feels personal, like something that brushed past my life before I even had the ability to remember it. Something that reached out, touched my family, and then vanished without explanation. Sometimes I wonder why it happened then. Why my dad? Why that moment? Was it random? Was it tied to the fact that there was a child in the car? Was it just something replaying an old motion, an old pain, without intent or awareness? Or was it something more deliberate? I don't know. What unsettles me most is that it wasn't just a sight or sound. It was physical. Touch crosses a line that noises and shadows don't. Touch demands acknowledgement. It forces you to accept that something interacted with the physical world, even if only for a second. I've heard people dismiss stories like this easily. They say stress, imagination, muscle spasms, hallucinations. I understand those explanations. I really do. But my dad was awake, driving, focused and alert. He wasn't half asleep. He wasn't dreaming. He didn't see something and misinterpret it. He felt it, and he checked immediately. There was no child awake. There was no explanation. That's what makes it linger. Even now, living far away, I sometimes think about that road and imagine it the way it must have been long ago. Dirt instead of pavement. Silence instead of engines. People being brought there not by accident, but by force. Children who never made it home. Hands that reached out once and never let go. Maybe it's just a story. Maybe it's just history mixed with fear. Or maybe some places remember more than we think they should. I don't know if there is something still waiting on that road, as my mom sometimes says. I don't know if it's looking for another victim or just repeating something it doesn't understand anymore. All I know is that the feeling never fully left, even after oceans and years put distance between me and that place. Some roads are just roads, and some roads carry what happened on them forever, even if you're asleep when they reach out. My spouse and I have been together long enough to know each other's limits, fears, and instincts. We're not people who jump to conclusions easily, and we're not the type to dramatize things for the sake of a story. That's important to say up front, because what we experienced together over the years includes things that still don't sit comfortably in any logical explanation. Some moments were strange but harmless. Others were unsettling in a quiet way. And then there was one event that stands apart from everything else, something so violent, so emotionally charged, and so unexplained that it permanently changed how I think about life, death, and what might exist beyond what we can see. The most frightening experience happened during a stay at my late father's house, toward the end of his life. My dad was very ill at the time. Cancer had taken hold of him in a way that was aggressive and unforgiving. His strength faded faster than any of us were prepared for. And as his health declined, my wife and I spent a lot of time at his home to help care for him. He lived in the country, in an executive-style bungalow set far back from the road, surrounded by about 8 acres of land. It was quiet out there, in a way that feels deep and complete. No neighbors close by, no traffic noise, just open space, trees, and long stretches of silence. Because of his condition, we had a baby monitor set up in his bedroom. It wasn't there for anything strange or unusual, just safety. We wanted to hear him if he needed help, if he fell, if he called out. It gave us peace of mind, especially at night or when we were in another part of the house. One afternoon, in the middle of a bright, clear day, something happened that none of us will ever forget. My wife and I were in another room when we heard my dad's voice come through the baby monitor. At first, it didn't alarm us. It sounded like he was talking, as if he were having a conversation with someone. That alone wasn't too unusual. Sometimes he talked to himself. Sometimes he spoke out loud when he was thinking or praying in his own way. But then his tone changed. His voice grew louder. Not just louder, but more intense. It sounded like an argument, like he was responding to someone. His words became sharper, more emotional. The volume kept rising, and within seconds, it went from conversation to shouting. That's when we ran to his bedroom. When we burst through the door, the sight and sound of him stopped us cold. My father was sitting up screaming with a level of raw emotion I had never seen from him before in my entire life. He wasn't confused. He wasn't delirious in the way people sometimes are near the end. He was fully present, fully aware, and absolutely terrified. He kept yelling the same words over and over. "I'm not ready to go." Again and again. "I'm not ready to go." There was desperation in his voice, panic, defiance. It didn't sound like a man talking about pain or fear of dying in an abstract way. It sounded like a man responding to something, or someone, telling him it was time. Before we could even process that, the room itself turned violent. The walls started pounding, not a single bang, not a creak or a thud. The walls were being hit over and over, rapidly, violently, like fists slamming into drywall again and again. The sound grew faster, louder, more aggressive, as if something was trying to break through the room itself. It wasn't coming from one spot. It felt like it surrounded us. This was not subtle. This was not something you could mistake for pipes or wind or the house settling. It was relentless, heavy, and forceful. My wife screamed. My dad screamed. I stood there for a split second, frozen, my brain scrambling to understand what was happening. The noise was overwhelming. The energy in the room felt thick, oppressive, almost suffocating. It felt menacing in a way I had never experienced before, like the room itself had turned hostile. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The entire episode lasted maybe a minute, possibly less. But in that moment, time stretched in a way that made it feel endless. When the noise ceased, the room fell silent. No aftershocks, no fading sounds, just silence, broken only by heavy breathing and the echo of what had just happened. My dad was shaken but conscious. My wife was crying. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest like it was trying to escape. I didn't know what to do except act. So I ran outside immediately. I walked the perimeter of the house. I checked the walls from the outside. I scanned the property. 8 acres of open land, no people, no vehicles, no equipment, no animals. The house sat far back from the highway, making it impossible for traffic or construction or any external source to create that kind of pounding. There was nothing, no explanation, no sign that anything physical had caused what we heard. It was the middle of the afternoon. The sun was out. Birds were chirping. The world outside looked completely normal. Inside that bedroom, it had been anything but. My father was a good man, the best kind. A loving parent, a devoted grandfather, gentle by nature. He wouldn't hurt a fly. He wasn't especially religious, but he wasn't cruel or immoral either. Like most people, he lived a full life, made mistakes, broke a few commandments here and there, but nothing that would define him as a bad person. And yet, during the last days of his life, he seemed to be fighting something far beyond his physical illness. Cancer was already terrifying enough. Watching someone you love waste away is a special kind of hell. But what shook me to my core was the realization that my dad wasn't just battling a disease. He was battling something emotional, spiritual, or psychological that none of us were equipped to help him with. Was it fear? Was it his mind coping with death? Was it something darker? I don't know. I still don't. I've thought about that day more times than I can count. I've tried to rationalize it. Stress, hallucinations, the brain misfiring under extreme trauma, group panic, acoustic anomalies. I've gone through every logical explanation available to me. None of them fully explain what we all experience together. What makes it impossible to dismiss is that all three of us were present. We all heard it. We all felt it. It wasn't a shared imagination. It wasn't one person's perception influencing the others. It was loud, physical, aggressive, and undeniable. That was the most violent and terrifying, unexplained moment of my life. I don't think I will ever witness anything like it again. After my father passed, I found myself oddly grateful for that experience, even though it still scares me to think about. It forced me to confront the reality that dying is not just a physical process. For some people, it may be a deeply emotional or spiritual struggle, as, well, whether you believe in demons, energy, the subconscious mind, or something else entirely, I know this much. My dad was fighting something real to him in those final days. That wasn't the only strange thing my spouse and I have experienced together, though it was by far the most intense. There have been other oddities, quieter but persistent, things that don't scream for attention but linger in the background. We have a photograph that still unsettles us. In the image, there appear to be orbs, bright and distinct, seemingly emerging from an iPad. What makes it stranger is that my eyes in the photo appear to be following them, tracking their movement. I wasn't aware of it when the picture was taken. My spouse noticed it later. The alignment, the timing, the way it looks, none of it feels accidental. We've also recorded unexplained noises on multiple occasions, sounds that weren't present when we were awake, voices that appear on recordings made while we slept. Not whispers picked up by chance, not distant television audio, but clear enough to be unsettling. One recording in particular still gives me chills. It captured a man's voice, medium to loud in volume, clearly saying the word bang. We were asleep at the time. We didn't hear anything during the night. No knocking, no loud noise, no disturbance that would explain it. And yet there it was on the recording. On more than one occasion, we've heard knocking. Not random sounds, not house noises. Clear, deliberate knocks, always three. The kind of knocking that sounds exactly like someone standing at a wooden door, rapping their knuckles against it. 3 knocks. Pause. Silence. No one there. It didn't happen once. It happened multiple times. We checked doors. We checked windows. We checked outside. Nothing. These things didn't come with feelings of panic the way the incident with my father did, but they created a constant sense of unease, a feeling that something unseen was present, observing, interacting just enough to let us know it was there, but never enough to give us answers. I'm not telling this story to convince anyone of anything. I'm not asking anyone to believe in demons, spirits, or the paranormal. I'm simply sharing what my spouse and I experienced together. We lived it, we heard it, we saw it, and whether there's a scientific explanation we don't yet understand or something beyond that, the experiences were real to us. The moment in my father's bedroom remains the most powerful and disturbing event of my life. The sound of him yelling that he wasn't ready to go still echoes in my memory. It wasn't just fear of dying. It felt like resistance, like refusal, like a battle being fought on a level we couldn't see. Cancer took his body, but something else seemed to be testing his spirit. That day changed me. It humbled me. It made me realize how little we truly understand about the boundary between life and death, and how fragile that boundary really is. I've never experienced anything so violent, so intense, or so inexplicable before or since, and I truly hope I never do again. I kid you not. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers for daily true horror stories that stay with you long after they're told, quietly unsettling and meant for the late hours. You can also turn on notifications so you're always here when a new story arrives and the night begins to stir again. Now, let's continue. When I was around 11 years old, I learned something about pain, fear, and how fast a normal day can turn into something that sticks with you for the rest of your life. At the time, it didn't feel like a story. It felt like survival. Looking back now, it still makes my stomach tighten. Not just because of the injury, but because of everything that happened around it. It was just another school day. Recess, the playground, kids running everywhere, yelling, laughing, doing what kids do when they're finally let outside. Our playground wasn't anything special, but there was one piece of equipment everyone loved. It was this big metal structure shaped like a ball, made entirely of curved metal bars. Imagine a hollow sphere you could climb inside, hang from, run through, or just mess around in. It looked harmless enough, and to us, it was basically a jungle gym from hell in hindsight. I was inside it that day, climbing and moving around while other kids were doing the same thing. There was nothing dangerous going on, no pushing, no fighting, just kids playing. At some point, I decided to run out of it. I didn't stop to think. I didn't slow down. I didn't measure my height or where the bars were. I just moved the way kids do, without considering consequences. That's when everything went wrong. As I ran out, I completely misjudged the height and position of one of the metal bars. Instead of clearing it, my head slammed straight into it. Hard. The impact was violent enough that even now I don't know how it didn't cause serious brain damage. It wasn't a glancing hit. It was direct, full force. The kind of hit that makes your visions explode into white and your ears ring instantly. For a split second, my head stopped, but the rest of my body didn't. My momentum kept going forward. So there I was, my head jammed against the bar, my body still moving. And physics did what physics does. My body flipped upward while my head stayed where it was. It felt like my neck stretched in a way it was never meant to. Then I lost contact with the structure entirely. I fell. It wasn't a huge fall by adult standards, but for an 11-year-old, 3 feet might as well have been a cliff in that moment. I fell awkwardly, uncontrolled, with no way to brace myself. And I didn't land on the ground. I landed on another metal pole. My spine hit it directly. The pain was instant and overwhelming. It wasn't like getting the wind knocked out of you or scraping a knee. This was different. This was deep, sharp, and burning all at once. It felt like my entire back lit up with electricity. I couldn't breathe properly. I couldn't scream right away. My body didn't know what to do. I remember thinking very clearly that something was seriously wrong. I didn't know what spinal injuries were back then. I didn't know medical terms. I just knew that moving hurt in a way I had never felt before. I tried to shift and pain shot through me again, through me. It wasn't broken, thankfully, but it was damaged enough to make every movement feel like punishment. For a moment, everything around me faded out. The noise of the playground felt distant, muffled, like I was underwater. Kids were still playing. No whistle blew. No teacher rushed over. To everyone else, it probably looked like just another kid falling on the playground. Eventually, instinct kicked in. I knew I needed help. I couldn't stand up. My legs felt weak and unreliable. My back screamed every time I tried to move. So I did the only thing I could think of. I started crawling toward the teacher. I remember dragging myself across the playground surface, using my arms, trying to keep my back as still as possible. Every inch hurt. I wasn't crying yet. I think I was in shock. My brain was focused on one thing only: get to an adult. That's when it got worse. Some kid noticed me. I don't even remember who it was. I don't remember their face. I just remember the moment. Everything shifted from bad to unbearable. Instead of recognizing that something was wrong, instead of calling for help, that kid yelled something along the lines of dogpile. Kids love chaos. Kids love piling on. Kids don't always understand when something is actually dangerous. And before I could react, before I could say anything, before I could protect myself, other kids rushed over. Suddenly, there were bodies everywhere. Weight, pressure, hands and knees and elbows landing on me. 30 kids, give or take, dogpiling onto an 11-year-old who was already injured. The pain exploded. It wasn't just my spine anymore. It was everything. My back felt like it was being crushed. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe properly. Panic finally set in. Real panic. The kind that makes your chest tighten and your thoughts scatter. I tried to yell, but my voice got lost in the noise of kids laughing and shouting. That's the part that still messes with me the most. Not the initial, not accident, not even the spinal injury. It was the feeling of being helpless, while people piled onto me, completely unaware that they were making something terrible so much worse. I remember thinking that they were going to paralyze me. I didn't have the words for it back then, but I knew instinctively that my back shouldn't be taking that kind of pressure. Eventually, a teacher noticed. I don't remember exactly how it ended. I remember the weight lifting off me. I remember hands pulling kids away. I remember being rolled carefully onto my side. I remember crying then, hard, because the adrenaline wore off and the pain fully hit. I was taken to get checked out. There was no broken spine, no paralysis, no permanent damage, thankfully. But there was injury, muscle damage, trauma, pain that lasted far longer than anyone expected. I had to be careful for a long time afterward. Sitting hurt, bending hurt, running hurt, even lying down hurt sometimes. But what stuck with me wasn't just physical. It was the realization that accidents don't happen in clean, isolated moments. They compound. One mistake leads to another. A bad moment turns into a worse one because of how people react or don't react. I think about how close that was. If my head injury had been a little worse, I could have had brain damage. If my spinal injury had been a little lower or harder, I could have been paralyzed. If the dog pile had lasted longer, if the kids had jumped harder, if no teacher had noticed in time, things could have ended very differently. I was 11. I shouldn't have been crawling across a playground with a spinal injury while other kids piled on top of me. That day taught me how fragile the human body really is, how quickly fun turns into pain, how little control you sometimes have once something goes wrong. It also taught me something about people, not in a bitter way, but in a realistic one. Most of those kids weren't trying to hurt me. They were just being kids following a shout without understanding the consequences. But intent doesn't erase damage. Pain doesn't care if someone meant it or not. Even now, years later, I remember that day vividly. The sound of metal, the sudden stop, the fall, the pain in my back, the shock of bodies landing on me, the feeling of being trapped in my own body, knowing something was wrong and not being able to stop it from getting worse. I've been through other painful things in my life since then. I've done some stupid stuff. I've gotten hurt in ways that should have taught me lessons earlier. But that playground injury stands out as the worst pain I've ever felt. Not just physically, but emotionally. It was the day I learned that being injured doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a kid crawling across a playground while everyone else thinks it's a game. Worst day ever doesn't even begin to cover it. I know a girl who went on a trip to Russia with a group of friends. And even though this happened years ago, the story still makes my skin crawl every time I think about it. It's one of those experiences that doesn't just scare you in the moment, but changes the way you think about strangers, travel, and how close danger can be without you realizing it. They had planned the trip for months. It was supposed to be fun, adventurous, something they'd talk about forever in a good way. None of them had been to Russia before, and that alone made it feel exciting. New language, new streets, new culture, new nightlife. They were young, curious, and confident, in the way people often are when nothing truly bad has ever happened to them. They rented a place to stay rather than booking a hotel. It was cheaper, and they liked the idea of feeling like locals instead of tourists. The owner was an older man who seemed friendly enough. He showed them around, gave them the keys, explained how things worked, and then right before leaving, he added something strange. He told them they were free to do whatever they wanted, go wherever they liked, explore the city, enjoy themselves. Then he paused and said very clearly that they should not go toward the streets on the left side of the area. Not be careful, not it's rough, not it's dangerous at night. Just don't go there. At the time, they laughed it off. People always say things like that, right? Every city has neighborhoods with bad reputations. They figured he was being overly cautious or dramatic. After all, they were in a group, not alone, and they weren't planning on doing anything reckless. For the first couple of days, everything was fine. They walked around during the day, took photos, tried local food, did all the normal tourist things. At night, they'd go back to the apartment, talk about what they'd seen, and plan what to do next. The warning about the left side streets faded into the background. Then one night, they decided to go out for drinks. They were looking for a bar, and after wandering for a while, they noticed one that looked lively and welcoming. Music spilling out, people laughing, lights glowing through the windows. It just happened to be on one of the streets they'd been told to avoid. They hesitated for maybe a second. What's the worst that could happen, someone said. They went in. At first it seemed completely normal. The place was crowded, but not overwhelming. Music played loudly. People were drinking, talking, dancing. Nothing about it screamed danger. They ordered drinks, found a spot together, and tried to relax. That's when the guy noticed her. He wasn't especially intimidating. He looked like an average guy you might see in any bar anywhere in the world. He started talking to her, flirting in a casual way. At first, she tried to be polite. She didn't want to cause a scene or make things awkward, especially since they were in a foreign country. But then he crossed the line. He started touching her leg. Not aggressively at first, just light contact. The kind that's easy to dismiss or brush off. The kind some people use to test boundaries. She shifted away. He did it again. She felt uncomfortable, her instincts telling her something wasn't right. She pulled away more clearly this time and made an excuse to go back to her friends. She laughed it off. But inside, she felt uneasy. Something about the interaction didn't sit right with her. It wasn't just the touching. It was the way he looked at her, the way he smiled, the way he didn't seem bothered when she moved away. They stayed a little longer, but the mood had changed. The bar didn't feel fun anymore. It felt tense, even though nothing obvious was happening. Eventually, they decided to leave. As they walked out into the street, she felt it. A burning sensation on her leg. At first, she thought maybe she'd brushed against something hot or that her skin was irritated from clothing. But the feeling didn't go away. It got worse. Sharp, intense, like her skin was on fire from the inside. She told her friends, and they stopped walking. They looked at her leg. There was nothing obvious. No rash, no cut, no redness that explained the pain. But she was clearly in distress. She said it felt wrong, unnatural, like something was happening beneath her skin. They didn't debate it for long. They decided to go to the nearest emergency room. By the time they got there, she was shaking. The pain was still there, and fear had taken over. Doctors and nurses brought her in, asked questions, examined her leg. They ran tests, blood work, swabs. The whole process took time, and every minute felt longer than the last. Eventually, a doctor came back with an answer. He told her that a drug had been rubbed onto her leg. Not injected, not swallowed, absorbed through the skin. She immediately thought of the guy at the bar, the touching, the way he'd rubbed her leg casually, like it meant nothing. She told the doctor everything. The doctor's expression changed. He explained that the substance used was not something random or harmless. It was a drug meant to numb flesh, a powerful agent that could make parts of the body lose sensation. He told her that it's known to be used by cannibals. The purpose wasn't pleasure. It wasn't recreational. It was practical. To numb meat, to make cutting easier, to stop pain responses. The doctor looked her straight in the eyes and told her that leaving when she did may have saved her life. Those words hit harder than anything else that night. If she had stayed longer, if she had gone outside alone, if she had ignored the discomfort, if her friends hadn't taken her seriously, she might not have walked out of that bar. The realization came crashing down all at once. The owner's warning, the street, the bar, the man, the touch, the burning, all the pieces fit together in a way that made her feel sick. She wasn't being flirted with. She was being prepared. The hospital treated her immediately. They cleaned the area thoroughly, administered medication, and monitored her closely. The drug hadn't had enough time to fully take effect. There was no permanent damage. Physically, she recovered. Mentally, it was a different story. They left the city as soon as they could. No more sightseeing, no more nightlife, no more curiosity. The rest of the trip passed in a fog of fear and disbelief. They stuck together constantly, checked doors and windows at night, and avoided unnecessary interactions. Even after returning home, the experience followed her. She replayed the moment over and over in her head. The way he smiled, the casual touch, the way she almost ignored her instincts, the way a simple decision to go into a bar almost changed her life forever. What terrified her the most was how normal it all seemed at first. There was no dark alley, no dramatic chase, no obvious threat. Just a crowded bar, music, drinks, and a guy who looked like anyone else. That's what made it so dangerous. Evil didn't announce itself. It blended in. She said later that the warning from the apartment owner haunted her the most. He had tried to tell them, not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. And they'd brushed it off, thinking they knew better. After that, she trusted warnings differently. She trusted her instincts more. And she never again assumed that curiosity was harmless. This wasn't a story about superstition or urban legends. It wasn't exaggerated. Doctors confirmed the drug. The timing made sense. The danger was real. And the thought that someone could sit at a bar, laugh, flirt, and quietly prepare another human being for something unspeakable was something she never fully got over. She still travels. She still goes out. But she pays attention now to tone, to touch, to discomfort, to silence that feels wrong, to warnings that don't come with explanations. Because sometimes the scariest situations aren't the ones where you feel immediate terror. They're the ones where everything seems normal, until it suddenly isn't. Back in high school, around 2007 or 2008, I learned a lesson the hard way about how fast something stupid and ordinary can turn into something genuinely life-threatening. At the time, it didn't feel like a horror story. It felt like teenage drama, the kind of messy situation that happens when people lie and emotions get tangled. It wasn't until much later that I fully understood how close I came to not making it home that night. I was casually hooking up with a girl from school. Nothing serious, no labels, no expectations. I wasn't trying to start a relationship, and I definitely wasn't trying to interfere with someone else's. She told me she was single. I knew she had been in a long-term relationship before, but she assured me it was over. I took her at her word. That was my first mistake. What I didn't know was that while they had technically broken up, they weren't really done. After about a month of her seeing me, she and her ex worked things out and got back together. The problem was, she never told either of us. She just kept seeing both of us, pretending everything was fine, like she could juggle two separate lives without consequences. Eventually, the truth came out. He found out before I did. I didn't find out until midnight on a Friday night. I had just gotten off work and was driving home. It was January in Kentucky, the kind of cold that cuts straight through you. Snow was everywhere. Ice covered the roads in patches you couldn't always see until it was too late. I was driving a 5-speed pickup truck, an old Ford F-150, manual transmission, no traction control, just me, the engine, and whatever control I could keep on slick roads. My route home took me through an airport tunnel. It wasn't a long tunnel, but it was narrow and dark. Technically wide enough for 2 cars, but there was only 1 lane. Once you committed to it, there was no turning around. You just went through and hoped no one was coming the other way. As I was approaching the tunnel, a car came flying past me and cut me off hard. No signal, no warning, just suddenly there, forcing me to brake. I was annoyed, but not alarmed. People drive like idiots all the time, especially late at night. I slowed down, kept my distance, and focused on getting home safely. Then things went wrong. About halfway through the tunnel, the car in front of me slammed on its brakes and came to a complete stop. Not a slow brake, not a tap, a full stop. In a dark tunnel, at midnight, in winter, on icy pavement. My heart jumped into my throat. I had a split second to react. If I slammed the brakes, I was going to slide straight into them and wreck both vehicles. Instinct took over. I downshifted, fought the steering wheel, and fishtailed around them just enough to avoid a collision. The truck slid, the tires screamed, and for a moment I thought I was going to lose control completely. But I made it past them. At that point, adrenaline was flooding my system. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Every instinct told me not to stop. Who in their right mind stops in a tunnel like that? Especially after brake-checking someone. So I kept driving. As soon as we exited the tunnel, something caught my eye. In the opposite lane, driving the same direction as me, was her ex. Or rather, her now current boyfriend. He was in a massive truck, way bigger than mine, staring straight at me as he passed. His face wasn't surprised. It wasn't confused. It was focused. Cold. That's when it clicked. This wasn't road rage. This wasn't random. This was intentional. The car that cut me off wasn't behind me anymore. That meant they had coordinated it. One vehicle to slow me down, one vehicle to box me in. They were trying to trap me in that tunnel. The realization hit like ice water. My stomach dropped. My brain started racing through worst-case scenarios, and for the first time that night, I felt real fear. Not embarrassment. Not anger. Fear. He wasn't mad and looking to talk. He was trying to hurt me. Maybe kill me. The truck sped up and got in front of me, slowing down deliberately. The other car moved into position behind me. They were trying to sandwich me, force me to stop, on empty roads, in the snow, at midnight. The truck in front of me slammed on the brakes again. I barely avoided him fishtailing a second time. The back end of my truck slid out. The tires lost grip. And for a terrifying moment, I thought I was done. But somehow, muscle memory and panic kept me upright. As soon as I straightened out, I floored it. I didn't care about speed limits. I didn't care about tickets. I didn't care about anything except staying alive. I took off toward the nearest busy area I could think of. The problem was, this was Kentucky. The roads were rural. Long stretches of darkness, fields, trees, no houses, no traffic, just snow, ice, and two vehicles that wanted me stopped. As I drove, I called the police. My voice was shaking as I told the dispatcher what was happening. I told them I was being chased. I told them where I was. I told them what kind of vehicles were involved. I told them I was scared. The dispatcher stayed on the line and told me to keep driving to a well-lit area somewhere public. They said an officer was on the way, but they couldn't get there instantly. I had to keep myself alive until then. For more than 8 miles, they chased me. 8 miles of driving no slower than 60 miles an hour on icy back roads in the middle of the night. Every turn felt like it could be my last. Every patch of ice threatened to send me spinning into a ditch. I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands hurt. They stayed close the entire time. Flashing headlights. Closing distance. Backing off just enough to not crash. It felt like being hunted. I finally saw the lights of a gas station in the distance. I've never been so relieved to see fluorescent lights in my life. I pulled in fast, screeched to a stop, and ran inside. The police were already on their way there. The two vehicles slowed, hesitated, and then peeled off, disappearing back into the darkness. The officer arrived shortly after. I gave my statement, still shaking, trying to explain everything that had just happened. He took it seriously. He didn't brush it off as teenage drama or a misunderstanding. He went to the other guy's parents' house that night and made it very clear that this was not okay. At school, the administration kept us separated after that. No contact, no confrontation, no more chances. That wasn't the end of what I learned, though. After everything calmed down, I found out there had been 3 other people in the car with him. I hadn't seen them because the windows were tinted. They weren't just trying to scare me. They had a plan. They were going to beat the hell out of me and leave me in the snow. Thinking about that still makes my chest tighten. If they had succeeded in forcing me off the road, if I had spun out, if my truck had stalled, if I had lost control for even a second, I don't know what would have happened. Out there on backcountry roads at midnight in winter, someone could have been left unconscious in the snow for hours. That kind of cold doesn't forgive. People don't just wake up from that. It scares me to think about how close it was. How one bad shift, one wrong turn, one patch of ice could have ended everything. How something that started as a lie in a teenage relationship nearly turned into a murder. After that night, I never got rid of my 5-speed Ford F-150. Even now, I like knowing I'm in control of the gears. I like knowing I can downshift and power through when I need to. That truck represents survival to me in a way I can't really explain. I also learned something else. Drama isn't harmless. Lies aren't small. People don't always react with words when they feel humiliated or angry. Some react with violence, and sometimes you don't see it coming until you're already running for your life. I'm married now. No more casual hookups. No more surprise boyfriends. No more teenage stupidity. I'm grateful every day that I made it out of that tunnel alive, that I had the instincts and the vehicle to escape, and that I chose to run instead of stopping. Because that night taught me something I've never forgotten. Sometimes the scariest moments in your life don't come from strangers in the dark. They come from people you never thought you were involved with at all. When I think back to that summer, there are a lot of memories that surface first. The smell of pine in the air, the way the lake looked early in the morning when the water was completely still, the sound of laughter echoing between cabins long after we were supposed to be asleep. Summer camp on Lake Crescent always felt different from normal life, like we were slightly disconnected from the rest of the world. The place had a strange atmosphere to it, even during the day. At night, that feeling intensified in a way I didn't really have words for back then. But I understand it better now. The camp itself was old, not falling apart, but clearly built long before any of us were born. The cabins were wooden, slightly crooked, with floors that creaked no matter how carefully you tried to move. The forest surrounded everything so tightly that it felt like the trees were leaning in, watching. During the day, it was beautiful, sunlight filtering through branches, the lake shimmering in the distance, the sound of water and wind blending together. At night, though, it felt heavy, dark in a way that didn't feel empty, but full. That night, we were all packed into our cabin. Me and my friends were sitting around, talking, laughing, probably telling dumb stories the way kids do when they're supposed to be settling down. The cabin had one main light, and it attracted bugs like crazy. Moths, mostly. Big ones, small ones, constantly flapping around the ceiling and walls. They bumped into our faces, brushed against our arms, and kept making that soft, dusty, fluttering sound that never stops once it starts. At first, it was just annoying. We waved them away, laughed about it, complained. Eventually, someone suggested turning off the light so the bugs would leave. That usually worked. Bugs follow the light, and without it, they lose interest. So we turned the light off and sat there in the dim glow coming through the windows, waiting. Most of the moths drifted away pretty quickly. One by one, they disappeared into the darkness outside. The cabin got quieter. The air felt calmer. But one moth didn't leave. It stayed. It kept flying around the same area near the wall, stubborn and irritating, like it was intentionally refusing to go anywhere else. It circled lazily, landed for a second, then took off again. Every time it brushed past someone, there was a groan or a laugh or someone telling it to go away. It didn't. That's when our counselor, Cody, spoke up. Cody was older than us, obviously, but not so old that he felt like a distant authority figure. He was the kind of counselor who joked around, told stories, and acted confident in a way that made you feel safe, but also curious. He had that calm, steady presence that made people listen when he talked, even if he wasn't trying to command attention. He watched the moth for a moment, then said, "Watch this, guys." We all looked at him. The moth landed on the wall, just sitting there, wings folded, completely still for once. The cabin was quiet. Everyone's attention was suddenly focused on that small, unremarkable insect clinging to the wood. Cody looked directly at it and said very clearly, "If you're an angel, rise. If you're a demon, fall." At first, nothing happened. There was maybe half a second of silence, the kind where you're not sure if you should laugh or wait. And then the moth dropped. It didn't flutter down. It didn't slide or drift. It dropped straight down like it had been cut loose. It hit the floor and didn't move at all. Someone laughed nervously and said something like, "No way," but then the laughter stopped. The moth didn't twitch. It didn't try to fly. It didn't slowly recover the way bugs sometimes do when they hit something. It was just dead. We all stared at it. I remember the exact feeling in my chest at that moment. It wasn't fear right away. It was confusion mixed with disbelief. My brain tried to explain it instantly. Bugs die sometimes. Moths are fragile. Maybe it was already dying. Maybe it just coincidentally dropped at that moment. But the timing was so precise, so immediate, that it didn't sit right. Cody didn't say anything after that. He just looked at the moth for a second, then looked at us. And there was something in his expression that I couldn't read. It wasn't smug or amused. It wasn't scared either. It was neutral, almost thoughtful, like he hadn't expected that outcome either. Someone eventually broke the silence with a joke, trying to lighten the mood. Another kid said it was just a coincidence. Someone else said Cody probably scared it to death. We all laughed again, but it wasn't the same kind of laughter as before. It was forced, thin, like we were trying to convince ourselves that nothing weird had just happened. But we all saw it, every single one of us. The moth was alive. It landed. Cody spoke. It dropped. It died. There was no delay, no room to argue about timing. It wasn't something that happened seconds later or after some distraction. It happened immediately after he said those words. That night, it was harder to fall asleep. The cabin felt different. The darkness outside the windows felt thicker, like it was pressing in more than usual. Every sound stood out. A branch snapping somewhere in the woods, wind brushing against the side of the cabin, the distant call of something moving near the lake. Normal camp noises, sure, but everything felt amplified. Lake Crescent has always had a reputation. Even before that night, we'd heard stories. Counselors talked about strange things happening after lights out. Shadows where there shouldn't be any. Voices heard near the water late at night. People waking up with the feeling that someone was standing near their bed, only to find nothing there. Stories passed down year after year, growing more intense with each retelling. Some of them sounded ridiculous. Some sounded like typical campfire scare tactics. But others stuck with you, especially when you were lying awake in a dark cabin surrounded by woods older than anything you'd ever known. That place felt old in a way that wasn't just about age. It felt like things had happened there long before we arrived, and that whatever those things were, they hadn't fully left. After the moth incident, those stories felt more real. I remember lying in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over in my head. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the moth had already been injured. Maybe it was exhausted. Maybe it had hit something earlier and just happened to die at that exact moment. All of those explanations are technically possible, but none of them explain why it dropped the instant Cody finished speaking. None of them explain why it didn't flutter, struggle, or move at all afterward. None of them explain why the cabin felt so heavy afterward, like something had shifted in the air. Over the rest of that week, little things kept happening. Not dramatic, movie-style paranormal events, but small moments that made you uneasy. Knocks on cabin walls when no one was outside. Whispers that sounded like they came from just beyond the trees. Footsteps near the lake late at night when everyone was accounted for. Every time someone brought it up, another person would have a similar experience. You start to wonder if you're feeding into it, if your mind is just connecting dots that aren't really there. But when enough people share the same unease, the same experiences, it stops feeling imaginary. What stuck with me most wasn't the idea of demons or angels specifically. It was the idea that something responded. Cody didn't yell. He didn't command. He didn't threaten. He just spoke a sentence almost casually, and something happened immediately afterward. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, that kind of cause and effect is hard to ignore when you see it with your own eyes. I've thought about that moment many times since then. As I got older, I learned more about psychology, about coincidence, about how the human brain looks for patterns and meaning. I understand how easily people can convince themselves that something supernatural happened when there might be a mundane explanation. I get that. But there's a difference between hearing a story and being there. There's a difference between being told something happened and watching it happen in real time, surrounded by other people who all witnessed the same thing. None of us could explain it that night. None of us could explain it afterward. And even now, years later, it still doesn't sit right. I don't go around saying that Moth was a demon, or that Cody banished something from the cabin. I don't claim to know what it was, but I do know that something happened that didn't fit neatly into how I understood the world at that age. Camp was always a place where the line between imagination and reality felt thinner, where darkness felt deeper and silence felt louder. That night just confirmed what a lot of us already felt, but hadn't said out loud. Some places hold more than memories. Some places feel like they're listening. And sometimes, when someone speaks into that space, something answers. Even if it's just a moth. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If you're still here, then these stories didn't simply fade away. They settled in. Every story you heard tonight came from real moments, real people, and real situations where something felt off or nearly went wrong. If you want to keep exploring stories that linger in your thoughts long after the night grows quiet, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers. There are more stories waiting in the dark, and not all of them let you leave in time.